I'm Vanessa, 32, and I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd walk away from a 6-year marriage. But when David started meeting his ex-wife Melissa every weekend, something inside me broke. "This is non-negotiable," he told me, eyes cold as Chicago winter. "You need to get used to it." That night, while he slept, I used my secret savings to book a one-way ticket to London. Sometimes choosing yourself is the bravest thing you can do. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to make a difficult choice for your own happiness. Let's dive into how I found the courage to start over. My story with David began like many modern romances at a charity gala in downtown Chicago. I was 24, then just starting to make a name for myself as a graphic designer at Crawford and Pike, one of the city's top advertising agencies. The event was for a children's hospital, and my company had donated our services for the promotional materials. I never expected to be invited to the actual gala, but my boss insisted the whole creative team should attend. "Network," she said, handing me the invitation. "These events are full of potential clients." I remember spending far too much on a dress I couldn't afford, a midnight blue number that made my eyes look almost violet under the right lighting. My roommate at the time, Stephanie, helped me style my hair into an elegant updo that made me feel sophisticated beyond my years. "You look like you belong there," she assured me as I fretted in front of the mirror. The ballroom of the Drake Hotel was intimidating, filled with Chicago's elite in designer wear that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I clutched my champagne flute like a lifeline, smiling politely at conversations I couldn't quite follow about stock portfolios and vacation homes in Aspen. That's when David appeared seemingly out of nowhere with an easy confidence that immediately drew me in. At 35, he was already a rising star at Langley & Mort, one of Chicago's most prestigious law firms. He wore his success comfortably, like the perfectly tailored charcoal suit that highlighted his broad shoulders. "You look as out of place as I feel," he said, his smile creating small crinkles around warm brown eyes. First time at one of these things, that simple acknowledgement of my discomfort instantly put me at ease. We spent the entire evening talking, first at the gala and then at a small jazz club nearby. When the formal event became too stuffy for both our tastes, David was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in my work and ambitions. Graphic design is about communication at its core, I explained passionately after my second gin and tonic had loosened my usual professional reserve. "Finding the visual language that speaks directly to someone's subconscious. Like good legal argument," he replied. "Finding the narrative that resonates with the jury on a gut level." By the time he walked me to my apartment in Lincoln Park, I was already falling for him. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Expensive restaurants, weekend trips to Michigan's wine country, surprise tickets to Hamilton when it came through Chicago. Everything about our relationship felt urgent and necessary, as if we'd both been waiting our entire lives to find each other. Looking back, there were signs I should have paid attention to. David rarely spoke about his past, deflecting personal questions with practiced ease. I knew he'd been married before. That much he'd shared early on, but whenever I asked about what had happened, his answers were vague at best. "We wanted different things," he would say with a dismissive wave of his hand. "It's ancient history now." I also noticed how he would sometimes take calls in another room, his voice dropping to a murmur I couldn't quite make out. When I asked who had called, his answers were always plausible but brief. "Just work," or "an old friend checking in." Then there were the relationships he maintained with people from his previous life. Dinner occasionally with his ex-wife's brother, birthday gifts sent to her niece. When I expressed mild surprise at these continued connections, David looked at me with slight disappointment. "I was part of their family for 7 years, Vanessa. Just because the marriage ended doesn't mean I stopped caring about them." Put that way, it seemed churlish to object. His loyalty, even to relationships that no longer served him, seemed admirable rather than concerning. I interpreted it as evidence of his capacity for commitment, never imagining it might one day become the very thing that would tear us apart. We married after 18 months of dating in a small but elegant ceremony at the Chicago Botanic Garden. My parents flew in from Phoenix, beaming with pride but quietly concerned about the speed of our relationship. My father pulled me aside at the rehearsal dinner, his weathered face serious beneath his forced smile. "You sure about this, Nessie?" he asked, using the childhood nickname I'd long outgrown. "You haven't known him that long." "I've never been more sure of anything," I insisted, and in that moment, it was true. Our early married life seemed to confirm I'd made the right choice. We purchased a sleek condo in River North with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The mortgage stretched our finances thin, but David assured me his upcoming partnership would make it manageable. "We're investing in our future," he said as we signed the mountain of paperwork at closing. We often spoke about that future, how we'd travel extensively once we'd established our careers, maybe even relocate to Europe eventually. London was my dream city, ever since a college semester abroad had left me enchanted with its energy and history. "We'll have a flat in Notting Hill," David would say, indulging my fantasy. "You can work for some cutting-edge British design firm, and I'll find a position with an international law office." These shared dreams bound us together, creating a sense of partnership that felt unshakable. For the first few years, our marriage was everything I'd hoped for. Passionate, supportive, secure. We entertained frequently, becoming known among our friends for hosting lively dinner parties, where conversation flowed as freely as the wine David carefully selected from our growing collection. If sometimes he seemed distracted, or if his work increasingly kept him away on weekends, I attributed it to the demands of his career. After all, I was busy building my own professional reputation, often working late to impress clients and earn the respect of my colleagues. "We're in our building years," I told myself whenever loneliness crept in during another solitary Saturday. "This investment of time will pay off." Little did I know that the foundation of our marriage had already begun to crack imperceptible hairline fractures that would eventually threaten the entire structure. By our 4th anniversary, those cracks were beginning to show, though I was still determinedly looking away, focusing instead on the beautiful facade we'd constructed together. The elegant condo, the sophisticated friends, the Instagram-perfect vacations, all of it seemed to validate my choice to confirm that I was living the life I was meant to live. How could I have known that beneath this carefully curated surface my husband was quietly rebuilding the bridges to his past that he had supposedly burned? The first real suspicion crept in on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was running late for a client presentation and had forgotten my portfolio on the kitchen counter. Racing back to our condo, I nearly collided with David as he exited the elevator, dressed impeccably in one of his designer suits, leather briefcase in hand. "Vanessa!" His surprise at seeing me was evident. "I thought you had that big Harrington presentation today." "Forgot my portfolio," I explained, slightly breathless from my rush. "What are you doing home? I thought you had court this morning." A flicker of something crossed his face, annoyance, concern, before his features smoothed back into their usual composed expression. "Case got continued. Came back to grab some files I forgot." He checked his watch. "Better hurry if you want to make your presentation on time." It was a reasonable explanation, yet something about the encounter left me uneasy. David was meticulously organized, especially when it came to his work. Forgetting files wasn't like him. The incident might have faded from memory, if not for what happened a few weeks later. David had been telling me for months that his firm required associates on partnership track to work occasional Saturdays on pro bono cases. I'd accepted this as part of the legal world's demanding culture, never questioning his absence every Saturday from noon until early evening. That changed when I ran into Trevor, one of David's colleagues, at Whole Foods one Saturday afternoon. "Playing hooky today?" Trevor asked with a friendly smile as we both reached for the same display of heirloom tomatoes. "Just grabbing some things for dinner," I replied. "David's at the office working on those pro bono cases." Trevor's brow furrowed slightly. "Pro bono cases on Saturday?" "Yes, he says it's part of the partnership track requirements." A flash of confusion crossed Trevor's face before he quickly recovered. "Right, of course. I was thinking of something else. How are you liking the new condo?" He changed the subject smoothly, but the damage was done. A seed of doubt had been planted, and despite my best efforts to dismiss it, it began to grow. The following Saturday, I made a decision I never thought I'd make in my marriage. After David left for his supposed pro bono work, I waited 15 minutes, then followed him. I felt ridiculous and ashamed, like a character in some tawdry novel rather than a professional woman in a supposedly secure marriage. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. David drove to an upscale neighborhood on the north side, far from his firm's downtown offices. He parked on a tree-lined street and walked with purpose to Belletta, an expensive Italian restaurant known for its intimate atmosphere and excellent wine list. We dined there for our last anniversary. I parked across the street, heart pounding, feeling simultaneously foolish and terrified. Maybe he was meeting a client. Maybe this was some firm function I'd misunderstood. Maybe, and then I saw her, a tall, elegant woman with sleek blonde hair cut in an expensive bob. She was waiting outside the restaurant, her face lighting up when she spotted David. The way they embraced was not the greeting of casual acquaintances or even friends. There was a familiarity there, a comfort in each other's physical space that spoke of deep intimacy. I knew instantly who she was, though I'd only seen her in a few photographs David had never bothered to remove from his Facebook history. Melissa, his ex-wife, the woman he'd been married to for 7 years before me, the relationship he rarely discussed. They entered the restaurant together, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back in a gesture I recognized. It was how he guided me through crowded spaces, a subtle sign of possession and protection. I sat in my car, unable to move, a strange numbness spreading through my body. I should have stormed into the restaurant and confronted them. I should have called him immediately and demanded an explanation. Instead, I drove home in a daze, pulled into our parking garage, and threw up in the trash can next to the elevator. Back in our condo, I moved through the rooms like a ghost, seeing our shared space with new eyes. How many lies had been told within these walls? How long had this been going on? What did it mean for us, for our marriage? I spent the rest of the afternoon in a frenzy of investigation, something I'd never imagined myself doing. I checked our shared credit card statements, finding regular Saturday charges at Belletta, going back nearly 6 months. I looked at our phone records, discovering weekly calls to a number I didn't recognize, but now suspected was Melissa's. Most damning of all, I found a hidden email folder when I logged into David's personal account from our shared laptop. Something I'd never done before, but my newfound suspicion had eroded any respect for his privacy. The emails between them were numerous and recent, filled with inside jokes and references to their meetings. While not explicitly romantic, the familiarity and intimacy were unmistakable. "Looking forward to Saturday, as always," she'd written just days ago. "You're the only one who truly understands." His reply had been equally telling. "Saturdays are the highlight of my week. V is clueless as usual, thinks I'm working." That casual dismissal of me, V is clueless, stung more than I could have anticipated, not just the deception, but the contempt behind it. In their private conversations, I was reduced to an inconvenient obstacle, a dupe, too trusting to question her husband's obvious lies. When David returned home that evening, I was sitting in our darkened living room, the city lights creating shifting patterns on the walls through our uncovered windows. He flipped on the light, startling slightly when he saw me. "Jesus, Vanessa, why are you sitting in the dark?" I studied him, this man I'd shared a bed with for 6 years, whose body I knew as well as my own. He looked exactly the same as he had that morning, the same man who had kissed me goodbye and promised to pick up dinner on his way home from work. Yet everything had changed. How was the office? I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. Productive, he replied, loosening his tie. Lot of paperwork, but we're making progress on the asylum case. The lie rolled off his tongue so effortlessly that for a brief, disorienting moment, I questioned what I'd seen with my own eyes. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But I knew better. The evidence was too clear, the deception too complete. That's interesting, I said, since I saw you having lunch with Melissa at Belletta today. The change in his expression was subtle but immediate, a tightening around the eyes, a slight clench of his jaw. Not surprise or confusion, but the look of someone calculating their next move. You followed me. His voice held more indignation than guilt, as if my act of discovery was the real transgression. Answer the question, David. Why are you meeting your ex-wife every Saturday and lying to me about it? He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture of frustration I'd seen countless times during our marriage. But this time, I recognized it for what it really was. Not stress, but the annoyance of someone whose carefully constructed narrative was falling apart. It's not what you think, he began, using the most cliched line in the Cheater's Handbook. Then what is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to me for months about spending time with your ex-wife. Melissa and I are friends, Vanessa. We were together for a decade if you count dating and marriage. That kind of connection doesn't just disappear because of divorce papers. Friends, I repeated incredulously. Friends don't lie to their spouses about meeting each other. Friends don't hide their relationship. What's really going on, David? He moved to the bar cart in the corner of our living room, pouring himself a generous measure of the expensive scotch he saved for special occasions. He didn't offer me any. Melissa's been going through a difficult time, he said, after a long sip. Her father died last year. She's having problems at work. Her new relationship fell apart. She needed someone who understands her, someone from her old life. And that had to be you, her ex-husband, the man who's now married to someone else. You wouldn't understand, he said dismissively. Melissa and I share a history that what makes it okay for you to lie to me every week, to sneak around behind my back. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd react exactly like this. He countered, his tone becoming defensive. You've always been insecure about my relationship with Melissa. Insecure. The word hit me like a slap. I didn't even know you had a relationship with Melissa. You barely mention her name. You've told me almost nothing about your marriage or why it ended. Because it wasn't relevant to us, he insisted. Well, it seems pretty relevant now that you're spending every Saturday with her while lying to me about working. David set down his glass with deliberate care. I think you're overreacting. This isn't some tawdry affair. Melissa and I are just supporting each other through a difficult time. Supporting each other, I echoed. Is that what you call it? Yes, that's exactly what I call it. Melissa understands me in ways you never could, Vanessa. We grew up in the same world. We have the same background, the same values. His words struck at my deepest insecurities. The fact that I came from a middle-class family in Phoenix, that I'd attended State University on scholarships while he'd gone to Yale, that I sometimes still felt out of place among his colleagues and friends. So, this is about class, I asked, my voice rising. She's a better match because her daddy was rich too. Don't be crude, he snapped. It's about connection, about someone who truly knows me. I'm your wife, David. I've been your wife for 6 years. If I don't truly know you, whose fault is that? He drained his glass, his expression hardening. Look, I'm not going to apologize for maintaining a friendship that's important to me. Melissa needs me right now. And what about what I need? Does that matter to you at all? Of course it does, he said, but his tone lacked conviction. But this isn't a zero-sum game. My friendship with Melissa doesn't take anything away from our marriage. Accept honesty, I countered. Accept trust. Accept the weekends you've been spending with her instead of me for months. David's patience was visibly wearing thin. I don't see why this has to be such a big deal. So I have lunch with an old friend on Saturdays. So what? An old friend who happens to be your ex-wife whom you've been secretly meeting while lying about working. The lying was a mistake, he conceded, though his tone suggested it was a minor transgression hardly worth mentioning. I should have been upfront. But I'm telling you now, Melissa is a part of my life and that's not going to change. I stared at him, this stranger wearing my husband's face. What are you saying? I'm saying that I need Melissa in my life and you need to accept that. The finality in his voice left no room for negotiation. This wasn't a discussion or even an argument. It was an ultimatum, a unilateral decision about our marriage that I was expected to simply accept. And if I can't? I asked, already knowing the answer. David looked at me with a mixture of pity and impatience. Then I guess we have a problem. In that moment, something shifted inside me, a fundamental realignment of how I saw our marriage, our future, and myself. For 6 years, I had built my life around this man, compromising, accommodating, trusting, and here he stood utterly unmoved by my pain, prioritizing his ex-wife's needs over our relationship without a second thought. Yes, I said quietly, I guess we do have a problem. Neither of us slept in our bed that night. David took the guest room without being asked, and I lay awake in our king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling smaller and more alone than I had in years. The city lights cast moving shadows across the room as I replayed our conversation, searching for some explanation that hurt less than the obvious truth. My husband had never fully left his first marriage behind. The week that followed our confrontation was one of the most painful of my life. David and I moved around each other like wary strangers, the comfortable intimacy of our marriage replaced by stilted politeness. He slept in the guest room without discussion, and I found myself both relieved and devastated by his absence from our bed. During breakfast on Monday morning, I made one last attempt at reason. I think we should see a counselor, I suggested as we sat at our kitchen island, the silence between us broken only by the clink of spoons against cereal bowls. Someone who can help us navigate this situation. David looked up from his phone where he'd been scrolling through emails rather than engaging with me. If that's what you want. His tone made it clear he was humouring me, not genuinely interested in fixing our marriage. Still, I clung to this small concession, quickly scheduling an appointment with a therapist who had helped one of my colleagues through a difficult divorce. Dr. Levine's office was neutral territory, a calm space of muted colours and comfortable furniture in a converted brownstone. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a direct manner that I appreciated immediately. "So, what brings you here today?" she asked. Once we were seated across from her, David and I, carefully maintaining distance on the same couch. I looked at David, giving him the opportunity to speak first. When he remained silent, I took a deep breath and explained the situation. The discovery of his secret meetings with Melissa, the lies, the ultimatum. Dr. Levine nodded thoughtfully, then turned to David. "Would you like to add your perspective?" "Vanessa has covered the facts," he said stiffly. "I maintain a friendship with my ex-wife. Vanessa feels threatened by it. I probably should have been more transparent about our meetings. Probably," I couldn't help interrupting. "You lied for months, David. You invented a work commitment to cover your tracks. I knew you'd overreact," he countered, "just like you're doing now." Dr. Levine held up a hand. "Let's take a step back. David, can you help me understand why maintaining this relationship with Melissa is so important to you that you were willing to lie to Vanessa about it?" David shifted uncomfortably. "Melissa and I have a history. We understand each other. She's going through a difficult time and needs my support." "And why did you feel you couldn't be honest with Vanessa about these meetings?" "Because she's always been jealous of my past with Melissa." I shook my head in disbelief. How could I be jealous of someone you never talk about? Before this, you mentioned Melissa maybe 3 times in our entire relationship. Dr. Levine made a note on her pad. It sounds like there might be some compartmentalization happening here. David, have you kept your past marriage separate from your current one? They're different relationships, he said defensively. Different chapters of my life. But they're overlapping now, Dr. Levine pointed out gently. These Saturday meetings have created an intersection between your past and present. David's jaw tightened. I don't see why I should have to choose. Melissa needs me. Vanessa is my wife. Why can't I have both relationships in my life? The issue isn't having both relationships, Dr. Levine clarified. It's the secrecy and the prioritization. Vanessa, how did it make you feel when you discovered these meetings? Betrayed, I said without hesitation. Humiliated, like I didn't matter enough for him to be honest with me, like I was an afterthought in my own marriage. David rolled his eyes slightly, a gesture not lost on Dr. Levine. David, Vanessa's feelings are valid, she said firmly. Whether or not you intended to hurt her, your actions have caused pain. That needs to be acknowledged. Fine, I acknowledge it, he said tersely. But that doesn't change the fact that Melissa needs me, and I'm not going to abandon her because Vanessa feels insecure. The session continued in this vein for the full hour. David defensive and dismissive, me increasingly hurt and frustrated, Dr. Levine trying valiantly to find common ground. At the end, she suggested we each take some time to reflect on what we wanted from our marriage and schedule another session for the following week. In the elevator down to the parking garage, David made his position clear. I'm not coming back, he said flatly. That woman was completely biased against me. She was trying to help us communicate, I protested. She was taking your side, he countered, making me out to be the bad guy when all I'm doing is helping a friend through a tough time. A friend who happens to be your ex-wife, whom you've been meeting secretly for months. David's expression hardened. I'm not having this argument again, Vanessa. I've made my position clear. Melissa stays in my life. You can either accept that or not. That evening, I called Stephanie, my oldest friend in Chicago, and the one person who knew me well enough to offer unvarnished advice. We met at a wine bar far from my neighborhood, where there was no chance of running into anyone from our social circle. I knew there was something off about him, Stephanie said after I'd explained the situation, her face flushed with indignation on my behalf. Remember how he acted at Tara's wedding last year, when his phone kept ringing and he kept stepping outside to take calls? I did remember David disappearing repeatedly during the reception, returning each time with increasingly flimsy excuses. At the time, I'd attributed it to work stress. Now I wondered if he'd been talking to Melissa even then. Why didn't you say something? I asked. Stephanie sighed, swirling her red wine thoughtfully. Would you have listened? You were so in love, Nessa, so certain he was perfect. And who knows, maybe I was wrong. Maybe it really was work, calling him that night. But we both knew it probably wasn't. What are you going to do? She asked, after a moment. I don't know, I admitted. I love him, Steph. Despite everything, I still love him. But I don't know if I can live with this arrangement he's proposing. Which is what exactly? That he gets to have lunch dates with his ex-wife every weekend, while you sit at home twiddling your thumbs. Put that way, it sounded even worse than it had in my head. He says she needs him, I said weakly. And what about what you need? Stephanie challenged. Does that factor into his equation at all? I didn't have an answer for that. When I returned home, David was in his home office, the door firmly closed. I could hear the murmur of his voice on the phone too low to make out the words. I didn't need to eavesdrop to know who he was talking to. Over the next few days, I made several attempts at compromise. Perhaps they could meet less frequently. Perhaps I could join them occasionally, get to know Melissa myself. Perhaps we could establish some boundaries around their relationship to make me more comfortable. David rejected each suggestion out of hand. This isn't a negotiation, he said coldly. Melissa and I have a standing lunch date on Saturdays. That's not changing. My next discovery made the situation even more untenable. While paying our credit card bill online, I noticed a recurring transfer from our joint account to an external account I didn't recognize. $500 sent on the first of every month for the past year. When I confronted David about it, his initial reaction was anger at my snooping through our finances. Those are our joint accounts, I reminded him. I have every right to know where our money is going. Who are you sending $500 to every month? He looked away, jaw tight. Melissa's having financial difficulties. I'm helping her out temporarily. With our money without discussing it with me. It's my money too, he countered, and it's not a significant amount given our household income. That's not the point, I insisted. We're supposed to make financial decisions together. That was our agreement. David's expression was dismissive. She's going through a rough time, Vanessa. I'm not going to let her struggle when I have the means to help. But I'm your wife, I said, hating the pleading note that had crept into my voice. Doesn't that count for anything? Of course it does, he replied, but his tone lacked conviction. But Melissa was part of my life long before you were. I have obligations to her too. Financial obligations to your ex-wife. We've been divorced for almost a decade. Some bonds don't break just because a relationship ends, he said with a finality that left me speechless. That night, lying alone in our bedroom while David once again took the guest room, I faced a painful truth. I was not a priority in my own marriage. For whatever reason, lingering feelings, misplaced loyalty, or something else entirely, David had never fully committed to our relationship. Part of him had always remained with Melissa, and now that connection was being openly acknowledged and prioritized over our marriage. The breaking point came that Friday evening. David arrived home later than usual, his manner distracted as he loosened his tie and poured himself a drink. I wanted to let you know, he said casually, as if discussing a change in dinner plans. I'll be away this weekend. Melissa's having a particularly difficult time right now, and I promised I'd help her through it. The whole weekend? I asked, my voice small. Yes, her sister's anniversary party is tomorrow night and she doesn't want to go alone. Then Sunday, we're meeting with a financial advisor to sort out some of her investment issues. He said all this while scrolling through his phone, not even looking at me to gauge my reaction. So you're spending the entire weekend with your ex-wife, I clarified, including attending a family function as her date and helping manage her finances. David finally looked up, irritation evident in his expression. It's not a date. I'm accompanying a friend to an event she's anxious about attending solo. A friend, I repeated hollowly. Right. You might want to find something to occupy yourself with this weekend. He continued as if he were doing me a favour by suggesting I find ways to fill the time while he was with another woman. Maybe call Stephanie, have a girls' night. In that moment, something inside me finally broke. The last thread of hope that our marriage could be salvaged, that David might eventually see the pain he was causing and choose me. When did you stop loving me? I asked quietly. The question seemed to catch him off guard. What? I never said that. You didn't have to say it. Your actions have been screaming it for months. David sighed, setting down his phone. This isn't about love, Vanessa. It's about obligation, about being there for someone who needs me. And what about your obligation to me, to our marriage? I'm still here, aren't I? He countered. I'm still providing for us, still committed to our life together. Are you? I challenged. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've got one foot and most of your heart still firmly planted in your previous marriage. Something flickered across his face. Guilt, perhaps, or recognition of the truth in my words. For a brief moment, I thought he might finally acknowledge the damage he was doing, might finally choose me. Instead, he said the words that would ultimately end our marriage. Maybe I never should have left her. He looked as shocked as I felt by this admission, as if the thought had been lurking beneath the surface of his consciousness for years, finally breaking through in a moment of unguarded honesty. The silence that followed was deafening. 6 years of marriage, of building a life together, reduced to ashes by 7 simple words. I didn't mean that. He backtracked quickly. I'm just frustrated by this whole situation. but we both knew he had meant it. The truth had slipped out, and there was no taking it back. "I think you should stay at a hotel this weekend," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I need some space to think." David nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his features at not having to face the aftermath of his revelation immediately. "That's probably for the best. I'll pack a bag." That night, after he'd left with an overnight bag and a mumbled goodbye, I lay awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling as the city lights cast moving shadows across the room. Maybe I never should have left her. The words played on a loop in my mind, each repetition another nail in the coffin of our marriage. As the night deepened, a strange calm settled over me. The agonizing uncertainty of the past weeks was gone, replaced by a clarity I hadn't expected. David had made his choice, had perhaps made it years ago, though neither of us had been willing to acknowledge it until now. The only question that remained was, what would I choose? In the stillness of our half-empty apartment, I remembered a conversation from early in our relationship when we'd shared dreams of the future over wine in my tiny pre-marriage apartment. "I've always wanted to live in London," I'd confessed. "Ever since my semester abroad junior year, something about that city just feels like home to me. We'll go there together someday," David had promised, kissing my hand. "Maybe even move there when we're established in our careers." Like so many of our early promises, that dream had been gradually set aside in favour of David's career trajectory, his preference for Chicago, his connections in the American legal world. I had compromised as I had on so many things, telling myself it was part of building a life together. But now, with the wreckage of our marriage all around me, I wondered what was stopping me from reclaiming that dream. I had a successful career, portable skills, savings of my own that David knew nothing about, an emergency fund I'd maintained throughout our marriage, my own private safety net. At 3 a.m, I opened my laptop and began searching for flights to London. By 4, I was researching short-term rentals in Notting Hill, the neighbourhood I'd fallen in love with during my student days. By 5, I was looking at job boards for graphic design positions in British firms. And by 6, as the first light of dawn crept through our floor-to-ceiling windows, I had made my decision. David had chosen Melissa. I would choose myself. The morning light revealed a world transformed, not by any external change, but by the shift in my own perspective. Our sleek, expensive condo no longer felt like home, but like a museum of a life I was ready to leave behind. The carefully selected furniture, the artwork we'd purchased together, the kitchen gadgets we'd accumulated, all of it seemed to belong to someone else now, to a version of Vanessa who no longer existed. I moved through our space with new purpose, making mental lists of what to take and what to leave behind. The practical considerations were overwhelming: visa requirements, international job applications, finding a place to live in one of the world's most expensive cities. But beneath the logistical challenges burned a steady flame of determination. London had been my dream long before David entered my life. Perhaps reclaiming it was the first step toward reclaiming myself. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, and spent the morning researching. The UK had a skilled worker visa that might apply to me, especially if I could secure job sponsorship from a British company. Alternatively, there were freelance visas for self-employed professionals. None of it would be easy, but it was all possible. Next, I checked my personal savings account, the one David knew nothing about, where I'd been depositing a small portion of each paycheck since before our marriage. The balance was substantial enough to support me for several months while I found my footing in a new country. By noon, I had booked a one-way ticket to London for the following evening. The decision to move so quickly was partly practical. The longer I stayed, the more likely David would persuade me to give our marriage another chance. And partly symbolic, a clean break, a decisive action after weeks of painful limbo. I spent the afternoon packing essentials into 2 large suitcases, focusing on versatile clothing and meaningful personal items. My grandmother's locket, The leather-bound journal Stephanie had given me when I landed my first design job, a small watercolor of the Chicago skyline that I'd painted during a rare creative burst last winter. The practical woman inside me knew I could replace most material possessions, but some things carried memories that couldn't be duplicated. As I packed, I called Stephanie, who reacted with a mixture of shock and admiration when I explained my plans. "London tomorrow. Are you sure about this, Nessa?" "I've never been more sure of anything," I replied, surprised by the conviction in my voice. "What about your job, your apartment, your life here?" "I can work remotely for a while, at least until I find something in London. The apartment is mostly in David's name anyway. And my life here," I paused considering, "my life here has been falling apart for months. Maybe it's time to build something new." Stephanie was silent for a moment. "What can I do to help?" Her immediate support brought tears to my eyes. "Can you store some boxes for me? There are things I can't take but don't want to leave behind." "Of course." "And you'll stay with me tonight. I don't think you should be alone right now." I hadn't considered that, but she was right. Spending a last night in the apartment I had shared with David would be unnecessarily painful. "Yes, thank you. I'll bring my suitcases and stay with you tonight." By late afternoon, I had the essentials packed and had written a letter to David explaining my decision, not apologizing for it, not asking for his understanding, simply informing him that I was leaving and would be in touch through lawyers to initiate divorce proceedings. The letter was shorter than I'd expected, just a single page of clear, direct statements. After years of emotional gymnastics trying to justify David's behavior and minimize my own hurt, the simplicity of the truth was almost shocking. Our marriage was over. He had chosen Melissa. I was choosing myself. I left the letter on the kitchen counter, propped against the expensive coffee machine David had insisted we needed. In a final gesture, whose significance only I would understand, I placed my key to the apartment beside it, along with my wedding ring. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. Some endings demand clarity. As I took one last look around the space that had been my home for 5 years, I was surprised by the absence of regret. Sadness, yes, for the dreams that had died, for the love that had faded, for the years invested in a relationship that had ultimately failed. But not regret, not for the decision I was making now. Stephanie was waiting for me when I arrived at her Wicker Park apartment, arms open for a hug that finally broke the strange calm that had carried me through the day. I cried then deep, body-shaking sobs that released years of suppressed hurt and disappointment. "It's okay," she murmured, stroking my hair like we were still college roommates comforting each other through breakups. "You're going to be okay." And somehow, despite everything, I believed her. We spent the evening drinking wine and reminiscing about our younger years, carefully avoiding too much discussion of David or what awaited me in London. It was a gift, those hours of normal conversation, a reminder that parts of my identity existed completely separate from my failed marriage. "You know you can always come back," Stephanie said as we prepared for bed, she taking the couch to give me the bedroom. "If London doesn't work out, or if you just miss Chicago too much, my door is always open." "I know," I said, hugging her fiercely. "Thank you for being my constant." That night, I slept more soundly than I had in weeks, dreamless and deep, as if my body understood that I would need all my strength for the journey ahead. Morning brought a flurry of final preparations, confirming my flight arranging for a car service to O'Hare, making sure my phone plan would work internationally until I could set up a British one. Throughout it all, I kept checking my own phone, half expecting to see David's name appear on the screen once he discovered my letter. By noon, my anxiety had grown. Surely he had returned to the apartment by now. Surely he had seen that my clothes were gone, that my wedding ring sat beside his coffee machine, that the letter explaining my departure was waiting for him. Yet my phone remained silent. "Maybe he hasn't gone home yet," Stephanie suggested as we shared a quick lunch before my departure. "Maybe he's still with her." The possibility stung despite everything. Even now, even after I had packed up my life and booked a flight to another continent, The thought of David and Melissa together caused a physical pain in my chest. It wasn't until I was in the car to O'Hare, Chicago's familiar skyline receding in the rearview mirror that my phone finally buzzed with an incoming call. David's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering. What was left to say but some sense of obligation, or perhaps just morbid curiosity, made me swipe to accept the call. "Vanessa, where are you?" His voice was tight with anger and something else. Panic, perhaps. "What the hell is this letter? What do you mean you're leaving?" "I think the letter was quite clear," I replied, surprised by my own composure. "Our marriage is over, David. You've made your choice. Now I'm making mine." "By running away to London, are you serious right now? This is childish, Vanessa. Come home and we'll talk about this like adults." "We've been talking for weeks," I reminded him. "Or rather, you've been telling me how it's going to be, and I've been expected to accept it. That's not a marriage. That's not even a partnership. So you're just giving up 6 years of marriage and you're throwing it away over a few lunches with Melissa." The audacity of his framing almost made me laugh. "A few lunches? You've been meeting her every weekend for months, lying about where you were sending her money from our joint account, and now you're spending entire weekends with her. You told me you never should have left her, David. What exactly am I supposed to be fighting for here?" There was silence on the other end of the line, the absence of an immediate denial more damning than anything he could have said. "I didn't mean that," he finally responded, his voice softer now, coaxing. "I was angry. Frustrated. You know I love you, Vanessa." "Do I? Because lately it seems like you love the idea of me, the convenient wife who doesn't ask too many questions, who accepts whatever scraps of attention you're willing to give her while your real emotional life happens elsewhere. That's not fair. None of this is fair, David. Not to me, not to you, not even to Melissa, who probably thinks she has a chance of getting you back." "This is insane," he muttered. "Where are you? I'm coming to get you." "I'm on my way to the airport," I informed him. "My flight leaves in 3 hours." "The airport?" His voice rose in disbelief. "You're actually going through with this Vanessa stop and think about what you're doing." "I have thought about it. For weeks I've thought about little else. This marriage isn't working, David. It probably hasn't been working for a long time, but I was too afraid to admit it. So we hit a rough patch. That doesn't mean you book a flight to another country without even discussing it with me." "A rough patch?" I repeated incredulously. "Is that what you call falling back in love with your ex-wife while still married to me?" Another telling silence. "I'm not in love with Melissa," he finally said, but the hesitation before his denial spoke volumes. "Maybe not," I conceded, though I didn't believe him. "But you're not fully in love with me either. Not anymore. Maybe you never were." "That's not true," he protested, but there was a hollow quality to his words, as if he were reading from a script rather than speaking from the heart. "Goodbye, David," I said, a sense of finality settling over me. "My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce." "Vanessa, wait!" But I had already ended the call. The phone immediately began ringing again. And again. And again. Text messages started flooding in. Angry at first, then pleading, then threatening. I silenced the notifications and slipped the phone into my purse, refusing to be drawn back into the emotional vortex of David's manipulation. O'Hare was crowded with the usual mix of business travellers and tourists, a sea of humanity, all in transit, all between one life and another. I checked my bags, moved through security, and found my gate with an hour to spare before boarding. Sitting in the terminal, watching planes take off and land through the massive windows, I felt a curious mixture of terror and exhilaration. I was 32 years old, about to start over in a new country, leaving behind a failed marriage and a life I had spent years building. By any reasonable standard, I should have been paralysed with fear. Instead, beneath the natural anxiety of such a major transition, I felt something unexpected relief. Relief that the pretense was over, that the painful limbo of the past weeks had ended. that I had finally taken action rather than continuing to react to David's choices. My phone buzzed again. Not David this time, but Stephanie. Just checking that you made it to the airport okay. Text me when you land in London, no matter what time it is here. Love you, brave girl. Her simple message brought tears to my eyes. I had friends. I had skills. I had savings. I had dreams beyond the boundaries of my marriage. I would be okay. As they called my flight for boarding, I took one last look around the terminal at the slice of Chicago, visible through the windows at the life I was leaving behind. Then I shouldered my carry-on bag, handed my boarding pass to the gate agent, and walked down the jetway toward an uncertain but undeniably different future. The flight to London was long, nearly 8 hours of enforced stillness that gave me too much time to think. Halfway across the Atlantic, somewhere over the endless darkness of the ocean, panic finally hit me. What was I doing? Moving to another country on impulse, leaving behind a secure job, a home, a marriage that, despite its problems, had been the center of my life for 6 years. My breathing quickened, my palms grew sweaty, and the confines of the economy seat suddenly felt suffocating. The middle-aged flight attendant noticed my distress as she passed with the beverage cart. "Are you all right, love?" she asked, her British accent somehow reassuring in its unfamiliarity. "Just a bit anxious," I managed to reply. "I think I'm having a panic attack." She nodded with understanding. "First time flying?" "No, first time. Starting over." Something in my expression must have communicated the magnitude of what I meant, because her professional smile softened into something more genuine. "Let me get you some water," she said, "and perhaps a brandy. On the house." She returned a few minutes later with both, plus a warm blanket. "Deep breaths," she advised, tucking the blanket around my shoulders with motherly efficiency. "Whatever you're running from, whatever you're running to, you're halfway there now, just to keep breathing." Her simple kindness steadied me. I sipped the brandy, feeling its warmth spread through my chest, and focused on my breathing until the worst of the panic subsided. "Thank you," I said when she passed by again. "We all need a bit of help when we're in transit," she replied with a wink. "Between one life and another." Her words echoed my earlier thoughts at O'Hare, and I took them as a small sign that perhaps I was on the right path after all. By the time we landed at Heathrow, exhaustion had replaced anxiety. The familiarity of the airport from previous visits was comforting. The distinctive London Underground roundel signs, the British accents over the PA system, the queues for passport control that were somehow more orderly than their American counterparts. As a visitor on a standard tourist visa, I could stay for up to 6 months, giving me time to explore more permanent options. I collected my bags, passed through customs without incident, and found myself standing in the arrivals hall officially in London. The reality of what I had done hit me anew. I was alone in a foreign country where I knew almost no one, with only a short-term rental secured and no job lined up. The enormity of the leap I had taken was dizzying, but I had come this far. There was nothing to do but keep moving forward. I used the airport Wi-Fi to order an Uber to my rental in Notting Hill, a tiny studio flat I had found on a short-term letting site. The landlord had agreed to meet me there with the keys despite the late hour. As the car wound its way through London's streets, I gazed out at the city that had captured my imagination years ago during my semester abroad. It was different now, or perhaps I was different, older, more experienced, more aware of the complexities beneath the charming surface. But the essential character of London remained the eclectic architecture spanning centuries, the surprisingly green spaces tucked between urban developments, the sense of history coexisting with modernity. My rental was on the top floor of a converted Victorian house on a quiet street lined with similar buildings, their white facades glowing softly in the streetlights. The landlord, a cheerful man in his 60s named Gerald, was waiting as promised. American, are you? He asked as he showed me the flat. A single room with a tiny kitchenette and an even tinier bathroom. Here on holiday, something like that, I replied, not ready to share my story with a stranger. Well, you've picked a lovely neighborhood, he said, handing over the keys. Anything you need, just call the number on the rental agreement. My wife and I live just 2 streets over. Once he left, I stood in the middle of the small space surrounded by my suitcases, utterly alone for the first time in days. The flat was clean but sparse. A double bed, a small table with 2 chairs, a love seat that had seen better days. The kitchenette consisted of a mini fridge, a 2-burner electric hob, and a microwave. The bathroom was functional but dated, with a shower stall barely large enough to turn around in. It was nothing like the luxurious condo I had shared with David, with its high-end appliances and stunning views. But it was mine, at least for the next month. A space where I could begin to rebuild. I unpacked the essentials, made up the bed with the linens Gerald had provided, and took a quick shower to wash away the grime of travel. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me, my body confused by the time difference and my mind still processing the enormity of what I had done. I sent a quick text to Stephanie, letting her know I had arrived safely, then stood by the window, looking out at the unfamiliar street below. In the distance, I could make out the glow of central London, a city of nearly 9 million people, most of whom were strangers to me. The isolation should have been terrifying. Instead, I found it oddly freeing. No one here knew me as David's wife, as the woman who hadn't been enough to keep her husband from returning to his ex. No one here had any expectations of who I was or who I should be. In this city of strangers, I could become anyone. I could become myself. 6 months later, London felt more like home than I could have imagined possible. The tiny studio in Notting Hill had been replaced by a slightly larger 1-bedroom flat in Clerkenwell, a vibrant neighbourhood near the city centre. I had secured a position with a boutique design firm specialising in brand identity for tech startups, work that challenged and excited me in ways my job in Chicago hadn't for years. The transition hadn't been easy. There had been nights of crushing loneliness, days of frustration, navigating the complexities of British bureaucracy, moments of doubt when I questioned everything about my impulsive decision to leave. But with each small victory, finding the flat, securing the job, making my first London friend, the conviction grew that I had made the right choice. David's initial barrage of calls and texts had eventually dwindled to occasional emails, mostly concerning practical matters related to our pending divorce. His tone had evolved from angry to resigned to most recently almost friendly. The condo sold for more than we expected, his latest email informed me. Your share of the proceeds has been transferred to your account. The divorce papers should be finalised within the month. I hope you're doing well in London. David. No mention of Melissa, no recriminations, no pleas for reconciliation, just the practical details of untangling a shared life, as if our 6 years together were being reduced to a series of transactions and legal documents. I was surprised by how little pain these communications caused me now. Time and distance had provided perspective, allowing me to see our marriage more clearly than I ever could while in the midst of it. David and I had loved each other in our way, but it had never been the deep, enduring partnership I had convinced myself it was. He had never fully committed to me, had always kept one foot in his previous life in his relationship with Melissa, and I had accepted less than I deserved, making excuses for his behaviour, minimizing my own needs and desires to accommodate his. The doorbell rang, interrupting my reflections. Stephanie had arrived for her week-long visit, her first trip to see me in my new life. We had spoken regularly via video calls, but having her physically present, a piece of my old life intersecting with my new one, felt significant in ways I hadn't anticipated. "This place is adorable," she exclaimed, dropping her suitcase just inside the door and pulling me into a fierce hug. "And you look amazing. London agrees with you." It really does, I agreed, leading her into the small living room. I can't wait to show you around. I've got the whole weekend off and I've planned an extremely touristy itinerary that my British friends would mock mercilessly. Stephanie laughed, settling onto my second-hand sofa. I expect nothing less. But first, I come bearing gifts. She unzipped her carry-on and began pulling out items I had left behind in Chicago. My favourite coffee mug, a framed photo of my parents, the vintage silk scarf my grandmother had given me before she died. I thought you might want these, she said, placing them carefully on the coffee table. Plus, I finally cleared out that storage unit where you left the rest of your stuff. Most of it went to Goodwill, as instructed, but there were a few things I thought you might regret giving away. The thoughtfulness of her selections brought tears to my eyes. These small touchstones of my previous life would help make my London flat feel even more like home. Thank you, I said, hugging her again, for everything. For storing my things, for supporting my crazy decision to move across an ocean, for being here now. That's what friends are for, she replied. Besides, it gave me the perfect excuse for a London vacation. We spent the evening catching up properly, sharing a bottle of wine, and the kind of rambling, intimate conversation that only happens in person. Stephanie filled me in on mutual friends' Chicago gossip and her own life developments. A promotion at work, a promising new relationship. And what about you? She asked, refilling our glasses. Any British romance on the horizon? I smiled, thinking of James the architect I had been seeing casually for the past 2 months. Maybe, it's early days yet, but there's someone. He's kind, thoughtful, interested in my work and my thoughts. A welcome change. I'm happy for you, Stephanie said sincerely. You deserve someone who sees your worth. I'm not rushing into anything, I assured her. I'm still getting to know myself again, figuring out who I am outside of my marriage, but it's nice to have company sometimes. The conversation eventually turned to David, as I knew it would. Have you heard from him recently? Stephanie asked, her tone carefully neutral. Just emails about the divorce proceedings, I replied. Very businesslike. The condo sold, the papers are nearly final. It's almost over. How do you feel about that? I considered her question, searching for the honest answer. Relieved mostly. Sad sometimes when I think about the good parts of our relationship, the dreams we had together. But mostly just peaceful, like I've finally stopped swimming against the current. And Melissa, any word on that situation? I shook my head. David doesn't mention her in his emails, and I don't ask, but Tara from my old office is still connected with David on social media. According to her, they're officially together now. Living together, apparently. Stephanie watched my face closely. And that doesn't bother you. To my own surprise, I realized it truly didn't. Not anymore. They were probably always meant to end up together. I was just an intermission in their story. That's a generous way to look at it, Stephanie observed. I'd be tempted to think less charitable thoughts. I laughed. Oh, I've had those too. Believe me, the first month here I crafted some very elaborate revenge fantasies involving David's expensive suits and various household substances. That's my girl, Stephanie grinned. But seriously, you seem so, I don't know, centered, grounded. It's like you found yourself again. I think I have, I agreed. Or maybe I'm finding a new version of myself, one who doesn't define her worth by someone else's ability to love her properly. The next morning, I took Stephanie on a walking tour of my new neighbourhood, pointing out my favourite coffee shop, the historic buildings, the small design studio where I now worked. We then ventured further afield, playing tourists at Buckingham Palace, the Tower of London and Covent Garden. I can see why you love it here, Stephanie commented, as we sat at an outdoor cafe, watching the street performers entertain the weekend crowds. There's so much energy, so much history. It's not perfect, I admitted. The weather is awful half the time, everything is absurdly expensive, and I still sometimes feel like an outsider. But it's become home in a way I didn't expect. Because you chose it. Stephanie suggested. This is the first major life decision you've made entirely for yourself in years. Her observation struck me as profoundly true. My move to London hadn't just been about escaping a failing marriage. It had been about reclaiming agency over my own life, about making choices based on my desires rather than someone else's expectations. That evening, I took Stephanie to dinner at a small Italian restaurant near my flat. As we were finishing our meal, my phone buzzed with an incoming email. I checked it automatically, then froze when I saw the sender, David. "Everything okay?" Stephanie asked, noticing my expression. "It's from David," I said, opening the email with hesitation. The message was brief, but unlike his previous communications. "Vanessa, I owe you an apology for a lot of things, but especially for how I handled the situation with Melissa. You deserved better. I've been doing some thinking since you left, and I realize now how unfair I was to you, how I took you for granted. Melissa and I are together now, as you've probably heard. It's what I thought I wanted, but it's made me see more clearly what I lost when you left. I'm not asking for another chance. I know that bridge is burned. I just wanted you to know that I recognize my part in the failure of our marriage, and I'm sorry for the pain I caused you. I hope you're finding happiness in London. David." I read the email twice, then handed the phone to Stephanie so she could see it too. "Wow," she said after reading it. "That's surprisingly self-aware for David." "It is." I agreed, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Vindication, a faint echo of old hurt, but mostly a sense of closure I hadn't realized I still needed. "Are you going to respond?" Stephanie asked, returning my phone. I thought about it for a moment. "Yes, I think I will. Not right now, but before too long." "What will you say?" "Thank you, I think, for the apology, for finally acknowledging what happened, and then I'll wish him well and mean it." Stephanie raised her eyebrows. "Very mature of you." "I'm not angry anymore," I realized. I was for a long time at him, at Melissa, at myself for not seeing what was happening sooner. But now, it just feels like a chapter that's ending, a necessary ending, so a new chapter can begin. Later that night, after Stephanie had gone to bed in my small guest room, really just a converted closet with a futon, I sat by the window of my flat, looking out at the London skyline. The city lights glimmered against the dark sky, a constant reminder of the vibrant, complex world I now inhabited. I thought about David's email, about the journey that had brought me here, about the woman I was becoming in this new life I had chosen for myself. The pain of my failed marriage had been real and deep, but it had also been transformative, pushing me toward growth I might never have embraced otherwise. Sometimes the greatest act of self-love is walking away from something that diminishes you, even when staying seems safer, easier, more familiar. Sometimes you have to board a plane to an uncertain future because the certainty of your present has become unbearable. I picked up my phone and began composing a reply to David. "Thank you for your apology. It means more than you might think. I hope you and Melissa find happiness together. Sincerely. As for me, I'm building a new life here one day at a time. It hasn't been easy, but it's been right. Take care, David. Vanessa." I read it over once, then pressed send, feeling as if I were releasing the last tether binding me to my old life. Not with anger or resentment, but with acceptance and the quiet dignity of someone who had discovered her own worth. 6 months ago, I had fled Chicago in pain and desperation, seeking escape from a marriage that had become a shadow of what it once promised to be. Now, I was choosing London not as a refuge, but as a home, not running from, but running toward possibility, toward growth, toward a future shaped by my own hands. Outside my window, London continued its endless ancient dance of light and shadow, of past and present, intertwined, and I, a newcomer, still finding my place in its rhythms, felt a sense of belonging I had almost forgotten was possible. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to start over, to pack your bags, board a flight, and trust that on the other side of the ocean you'll find not just a new city, but a new version of yourself, stronger, wiser, and finally authentically your own. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice for your own happiness? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please like and subscribe to join me for more stories of resilience and self-discovery. Remember to share with anyone who might need to hear that it's never too late to choose yourself. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the hardest goodbyes lead to the most beautiful new beginnings.